Everyone has an opinion on God of War Laufey. Most of them formed in the first 48 hours after the announcement. Mine didn't fully form until I watched that interview, because there are two things in that interview that nobody's talking about, and they explain exactly what this game is, why it got made, and who it's actually being made for. So let's get into it. God of War Laufey got announced, and the internet did what the internet does. Two camps formed within hours, fans saying this isn't a God of War game without Kratos. Why would anyone want to play as his 45-year-old dead wife? Other fans excited, defending the creative direction, accusing the first group of being sexist, plus all the hot takes, the memes, people hating the cube. The whole cycle ran its course. And look, I've got opinions on all of that, we'll get there. But first, let's talk about that interview. I do see this interview as the clearest sign of disconnect between Western developers and gamers. Cory said this.
I think Faye is she's in my top 3 favorite characters, right? Of the entire franchise.
The entire franchise. All of it. Not the recent 2 games, the past 20 years. A character introduced at the beginning of the 2018 game as a corpse, seen briefly, never really known, is for the man who's been with the franchise throughout its entire history, one of the 3 best characters ever. I assume Kratos is one of the 3, which means her and Sindri are peak for him. Now I want to be fair here. Cory has probably written things about those characters that never made it on screen. He knows Laufey in ways that we don't. If you're choosing from a private library of material only you've read, that pick would make sense. For us the players, if we don't know anything, and then the game comes out, it will live or die based on its own merit. But not in this case. This isn't his private library, it's ours. People already know the lore and characters and history. And I'm pretty sure if you ask any God of War player who's your top 3 or 5 or 10 characters, Laufey would probably not be on any of those lists. I'd love to play a game about Brok and Sindri's adventures, or as Thor when he wasn't chubby and drunk, or even young Odin, or the crazy Balder, or Heimdall. Hell, I'd take a game led by Mimir. There are so many great characters that would come to mind. She's not one of them. So I guess the challenge is on Cory to show us why she's in his top 3, and if we'll think the same after we play the game. But there's 2 things that actually caught my attention, 2 things that made me stop. First, Laufey is one of Cory Barlog's top 3 favorite characters in the entire franchise, and he's not directing this game. Sit with that for a second. A character in your top 3 of all time, in a franchise you've given decades of your life to, and when it's time to make her game, you're not directing it. There are only 2 explanations for that as far as I'm concerned. The first one, Cory is already deep in production on something else, something big enough that he can't step away from it to direct a game about one of his favorite characters. He directed the 2018 God of War and co-directed Ragnarok, and I get that he's moved up as head of creative, but I don't think being super busy is the real reason here. The second explanation, and I'll tell you later why I think this seems to me the more likely explanation, is that this is another politically driven stunt like we often see from Western developers. You know, you have to have a woman directing a game led by a woman. Am I too cynical here to think that they think that? Because what would a man know about the experience of a woman? Or a goddess in this instance? I really hope I'm wrong. Enter Ariel Lawrence. It seems like this lady has been with the studio for ages and worked on most of the previous God of War games in many capacities, which is obviously good news. But they tell us in the interview that she left the studio and then came back as a lead writer on this game, then moved to be the director. The second thing that caught my attention, if you watch that interview, the whole thing is self-indulgent. There's nothing about the players, or their expectations, or what they know they want. There's no mention of the fans of the franchise that have been playing it for 20 years, essentially giving them the positions they're in. They're talking about themselves, their feelings, their preferences, the voices in their heads, and how she only came back because of Cory and how amazing the studio is. And I get that this video aims to introduce the new director, showcasing her pedigree or credibility, being someone who worked on the franchise for that long. But why would the viewer care about being introduced to someone they don't know, talking about something they didn't ask for? It's 24 minutes of no mention of the target audience, if they even know who that is. There's a part where he asks her this.
Talk about what part of you you're putting into the game.
I mean, I think, we've always come at stories from Santa Monica with, characters at their heart, right? And finding ourselves, even in Kratos, everybody's had a point in their time when they've made some decisions that maybe they wish they hadn't and really thought things through again. But I think for Faye, that was that question of, who is she? Who was this person that everybody idolized and, just stood in awe of, and to really think about all the facets that make up that person, right? She's, a loving wife and mother, but she's also a warrior. She's a guardian of her people. She's a rebellion leader. She's all of these things. And to be able to have an opportunity to just explore that person with the detail and the love that Santa Monica brings is just, very touching, very exciting.
I don't think she actually even answered him. Should we expect such waffling in the game's dialogue like this conversation? Pretty worrying. So when you put those two things together, Cory stepping back from directing a project this personal to him, a returning director whose first public interview has almost nothing to say to the people who have been playing this franchise for years, what you start to see is a game that may have been greenlit for reasons that have very little to do with what God of War players actually want. That's what the interview told me, and I think it explains a lot of what came after. The obvious thing here is that this is not God of War. This is a game riding the name of the franchise like a vehicle. God of War is not Santa Monica. It's not the engine that runs the game. It's the identity of the character that carries the franchise and pulls the interest. God of War is Kratos, the angry, brutal, barely contained man who only needs to say boy to sell millions of copies. That is what the brand means. Everything else has worked because it was built around him. And I'm not taking away anything from the story or caricaturizing it. The story is great and core to the experience and has been a great vehicle in the past games to keep the game moving. Putting God of War as a tag or a label on this game is in all sense of the word a bait and switch. It's not a God of War Mythology Chronicles. It's not just called Laufey with the same font. It has the brand name on it. I actually think it would have been better if this game came out along with a new actual God of War or right after it. It will feel like an extra, more lore if you want. But obviously that's both quite difficult in terms of production and God forbid it would make Laufey seem like an afterthought or a sidekick. But honestly, who would play a game called The Last of Us and the main character is Dina and her story? Who would play Uncharted but instead of Drake, the main characters would be Nadine and Chloe? Oh, they actually did that. Uncharted Lost Legacy was originally a DLC and definitely did not sell anywhere near Uncharted 4. That came out a year before it. Did you hear that? A year before. Like I said, if this game came out right after a main franchise entry, people wouldn't feel so disappointed. But the last God of War was 4 years ago. 4 years of speculations. Egypt or Atreus, what's coming next? People holding their breath for an announcement? And whether those rumors had any basis or not, the hype for God of War has been building for 4 years. And now we got this. I don't think that was the announcement most of us were waiting for. And given what I just described about how this game came to exist, I don't think it was made in response to what we were waiting for either. You probably heard the gender debate a million times, and it's real, but it's not what it keeps getting framed as. I saw this on Twitter, and it's not really some conspiracy or a coincidence. That's what we get from Western studios. So it's pretty hard to absolve those developers from sexism, honestly. Because what they're simply saying is that the only way a female can lead a game is if we take an established name with a male lead and switch the main character. But wait, Lara Croft exists, Horizon exists, and so many others. If it's not sexism, then I'm waiting for the new Tomb Raider installment led by Larry Croft. or the New Horizon led by, I don't know, Alan or Alec. I like those games too, and I'll never play a Horizon game without Aloy. It's just not what it is. Nobody complained about the new Stellar Blade with a female lead. And if you think this is Guna bait, nobody complained about Beast of Reincarnation being led by a female. The newly announced Resident Evil Code Veronica, nobody complained that Claire Redfield is back. In fact, it was one of the highlights of Summer Game Fest. Nobody's asking for the masculine Clark Redfield to replace her. This isn't about gamers not wanting women in games, it's about forcing women onto a franchise just for the sake of an agenda. An agenda that constantly fails and causes backlash and bad sales, further showing the disconnect between the ideologically driven Western developers and their core audience. The audience they're losing to Eastern developers every day. And when all this backlash happens, they can't have an honest conversation about it. They shut it down and call it some sort of ist or ism. It's even worse that Laufey does look quite a bit uglified compared to the real actress, which is yet another trope that we've seen before from Western studios. The actress Deborah Ann Woll is a perfect fit for a character like this. She's not just an actress from Daredevil, she's a big D&D nerd, similar to the Critical Role crowd, with Matt Mercer and Laura Bailey, who are literally some of the best voice actors we've had in the industry for decades. They're real nerds who are fully into the fantasy medium. They genuinely care about the things we like. The casting is not the problem. And to me, this uglification filter is another big tell. It's not a technical limitation, it's not the lighting, it's not the engine. It's the same thing we've seen from Western studios enough times now that has become a pattern you can recognize instantly. And what that decision tells you, whether anyone will say it plainly or not, is that the collective decision in the studio is based on the belief that Laufey couldn't be equally compelling and beautiful at the same time. Like those two things are incompatible. And that's the problem. Not because every female character needs to look like a supermodel, but because when it's this clearly intentional, it says more about the people making the game than about the character or even the players. And you want to know how a studio actually feels about its own announcement? Don't watch the reveal. Watch what happened in 48 hours after. Santa Monica went into full PR mode almost immediately. Reassurances everywhere. Kratos is still the God of War. We have so many more stories to tell with him, and please come along for the ride. The director also said in another interview that the full brunt of Santa Monica Studios is working on this game. So it's not like they're making this game in parallel with the new God of War that people might actually want. Which means this game is a direct cause for the delay of the next God of War. And that's the reason I was leaning more towards the fact that Cory not directing is not because he's busy. If the whole studio is busy working on this game, what has he been doing for the past 4 years? Brainstorming? Coming up with ideas for Kratos? For 4 years? Or rather busy with some new unannounced IP like some reports are suggesting? All of this means Kratos is likely being pushed further and further. We are probably not seeing a new Kratos game for 5 years, if not more. But sure, so many more stories are coming. Then Domino's Pizza here in the UK tweeted that a God of War game with no Kratos is like a pepperoni passion pizza with no pepperoni. A random intern more in tune with the audience than the actual studio. And instead of ignoring it, which is what a confident studio would do, they had to reply. They literally got rage baited by a pizza company over a creative decision they supposedly believe in. That is not how a studio behaves when it trusts its premise. A studio that's confident and knows what it made will show you the game and let it speak for itself. Which ironically kind of reminds me of when Netflix did the same thing after the Henry Cavill and Hemsworth switcheroo. And look where that show is now. It's in the bin. From everything I said, the Cory interview, the brand, the PR response, the design decisions, you can see that the problem isn't a graphics engine that can't make women look as attractive as they are in real life. It's not the actors themselves or their talent, and it's not women in games in any broad sense. It's the fact that Western studios insist on making forced, agenda-driven decisions as the core principle from which they operate, rather than making player-driven decisions. Despite having the good tech, the good talent, and the good artists and engineers who make video games possible. We have seen enough patterns to recognize this or even be allergic to it. It makes those games feel like they're not made for us, they're not genuine, and they're not trying to be enjoyable experiences as much as they need to carry a message. And it's such a shame. And I want to be clear, I'm not writing this game off. The graphics look amazing, nothing new here for Santa Monica. The combat looks faster, Laufey is more agile and more comfortable with magic than Kratos. She can actually jump, which Kratos apparently forgot how to do years ago. The whole idea of an afterlife for the gods is really engaging and cool. The ingredients for a good game are there. They have the tech and talent and the engineers that can make this an amazing game. But right now, I cannot see enough signs that this game is being made for us, for the people who have been playing God of War since the first installment. I hope I'm wrong, I genuinely do. The challenge is on Santa Monica to show us why Laufey belongs in the conversation. Cory thinks she's top 3, prove it. Make the game that makes us agree. I'll be here when it comes out and I'll play it. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about this announcement. Have I missed any more drama during this storm of backlash? And if you feel the same worry that I do about Western games, hit the like, sub, and hype button if you have it, and I'll see you in the next video.